Elias Corven thought he was following Siraya Chantharat for love, but the moment he stepped into Ayutthaya's ancient temples, he realized he was walking into a trap designed long before he even knew her name. Elias Corven lived a life that looked calm from the outside, but felt unbearably empty from the inside. He spent most days working alone in his cramped studio in Oslo, staring at glowing screens for hours as he edited logos and posters for clients he never met. His world had become a loop of cold mornings, silent meals, and long nights, where the only sound was the hum of his computer. Most of his friends had married, moved away, or disappeared into busy routines. Elias told himself he didn't mind the solitude, yet every evening he lingered online, scrolling through travel forums and social groups just to feel connected to something beyond his small apartment. One night, while browsing a page about Southeast Asian temples, an image caught his eye. It showed a young Thai woman, kneeling beside an ancient stone stupa, holding lotus flowers. Her name appeared above the post Siraya Chantharat. There was something almost unreal about her expression. Calm and unforced, felt like a person who had found peace in a chaotic world. Elias clicked on her profile out of curiosity and found more photos of her assisting with temple repairs, handing water bottles to monks, and sweeping courtyard stones covered in fallen leaves. Her captions spoke about compassion, balance, and living without attachment. Elias felt drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain. He sent her a short message thanking her for sharing such beautiful images. To his surprise, she responded quickly with polite warmth. Over the next days, their exchanges grew longer. Siraya wrote about growing up near the ruins of Ayutthaya, volunteering for Buddhist foundations, and dedicating her free time to preserving old temples. She shared stories of quiet sunrises, saffron-robed monks walking barefoot along dusty roads, and evenings filled with the echoes of chanting. Elias absorbed every word with fascination, imagining a world entirely different from the one he lived in. As their conversations continued, Siraya gradually opened up about her dream of restoring abandoned temples that had been neglected for years. She spoke of them almost like abandoned children needing care. Elias found himself admiring her devotion and selflessness. He had never met anyone who seemed so purely motivated by service and spirituality. He began checking his messages the moment he woke up, reading her updates with a flutter in his chest he hadn't felt since his early 20s. Without realizing it, Elias started adjusting his habits around her schedule. He stayed awake late into the night just to catch her online. He researched Ayutthaya's history, studied Buddhist customs, and watched videos about Thai architecture. The more he learned, the more he imagined a life far away from his gray, repetitive existence. Eventually, Siraya mentioned how difficult it had become to maintain temple projects due to funding shortages. She described carrying heavy buckets of cement across uneven ground, cleaning cracked statues alone, and worrying that she couldn't do enough. Elias felt a sudden urge to help, even though she never directly asked for anything. He offered support, not financially but emotionally, insisting he admired her strength. Siraya thanked him in a way that made him feel needed, something he hadn't felt in years. Weeks passed, and his attachment deepened. The idea of meeting her began forming quietly in his mind. At first as a distant possibility, then as a plan he replayed over and over. He imagined stepping into that world she described, standing among ancient stones, surrounded by calm instead of loneliness. He imagined her smile in person, the way she might guide him through winding temple paths. One evening, after a long day that left him feeling especially hollow, Elias looked at a photo Siraya had posted, a golden temple glowing under sunset. Light, and made a decision without hesitation. He booked a flight to Thailand. He told no one what he was doing, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he feared others would call it foolish. For the first time in a long while, he felt alive, driven by something other than routine. What he didn't know was that Siraya had noticed the moment he viewed her profile, the moment he commented, and the moment he began engaging more frequently. Every step he thought he had taken freely had been carefully observed. She knew exactly when he would make the choice to follow her. She had been waiting for it. When Elias arrived in Ayutthaya, the warm air and slow rhythm of the ancient city felt almost unreal. The ruins seemed frozen in time, standing quiet among trees and pools of still water. He tried to steady his nerves as he made his way through the narrow streets. Siraya had sent him a set of directions the night before, guiding him to a small park near one of the oldest temple complexes. The thought of seeing her overwhelmed him with anticipation and worry. Yet he convinced himself that everything would feel natural once they met in person. Siraya appeared exactly where she said she would, standing near a tree whose branches reached outward like open arms. She greeted him with a gentle expression, and carried a small basket filled with flowers and incense. Elias felt awkward at first, unsure what to do with his hands or how to read her body language. But she motioned for him to follow with a calm, steady movement. Her presence gave him the sense that she had done this many times before, guiding travelers through this world of stone relics and silent courtyards. She led him toward Wat Maha, where tree roots wrapped around ancient stone faces, in ways that looked both beautiful and unsettling. Elias watched her move with quiet confidence, as though she belonged to the place and it to her. She walked barefoot while carrying offerings, explaining through brief gestures the significance of different relics and statues. Elias felt honored to witness traditions he had previously only read about online. But as they entered a dim hall at the back of the complex, the atmosphere changed. The air felt heavier, cooler, as though the sunlight outside could not reach the space. Siraya walked ahead with her basket and knelt near a smaller shrine tucked into an alcove. Elias remained several steps behind, unsure if he should approach. He noticed her removing a tightly wrapped red cloth bundle from beneath her robes. The bundle was larger than he expected, too large to be a simple offering. She placed it beside the base of the Buddha statue and closed her eyes, resting her hands on it. Elias watched silently. Something about the moment felt different from the peaceful rituals he had seen in videos. Her body was tense, shoulders rigid, fingers gripping the cloth too firmly. For several long seconds, she stayed still, then opened her eyes, glanced over her shoulder, and gestured at him to wait outside. The gesture was firm enough that he did not question it. He stepped back into the sunlight, blinking from the brightness. While waiting, he tried to tell himself the bundle meant nothing unusual. Perhaps it contained food or temple materials wrapped for respect. Yet he sensed a quiet urgency in her movements, as though she wanted him away from whatever she was doing. When Siraya reappeared minutes later, the red bundle was gone. She carried only empty hands and an expression that had shifted into something unreadable. She gave no explanation and continued walking as though everything was normal, leading him toward another section of the temple grounds. As they passed through the courtyard, Elias noticed two elderly locals watching Siraya with lowered eyes. They bowed their heads, not with warmth or familiarity, but with a nervous formality. It was the kind of bow someone gives when confronted by a person they fear offending. Elias tried to dismiss the observation, yet it lingered in his mind. Throughout the afternoon, he saw more signs that Siraya was not just a volunteer. Some monks stepped aside quietly when she approached, others avoided eye contact. A young novice, carrying a tray of candles, nearly dropped it when she came near. Elias could not understand what caused such reactions. Siraya never raised her voice or acted aggressively. She remained soft-spoken and composed. But the people around her behaved as though she carried something invisible and dangerous. Near sunset, she guided him toward a viewpoint overlooking the ruins. From there, the city looked peaceful and golden, but Elias could not escape the unease forming in his chest. He replayed the moment inside the temple hall, the red cloth bundle, the tension, her insistence that he leave the room. He had traveled across the world for love, but the more time he spent at Siraya's side, the more he sensed she lived a life far more complicated than the gentle image she shared online. She moved through Ayutthaya, as though she belonged to a world hidden beneath the ruins, a world he knew nothing about. And Elias had the growing suspicion that she had brought him here for a reason he was not meant to understand. Elias awoke the next morning with a sense of heaviness he couldn't explain. The unease from the previous day clung to him like humidity in the air. Siraya had told him they would visit a quieter part of Ayutthaya, where fewer tourists went and where, she said, temple work was most needed. The phrasing lingered in his mind. She had spoken as though she belonged to an organization rather than volunteering alone. Still, he followed her instructions and met her near a small canal, lined with old wooden houses. Siraya approached carrying a cloth bag instead of her usual basket, and inside it, Elias could see shapes that did not resemble offerings. She gestured for him to walk with her along the narrow road until they reached a cluster of half-collapsed structures covered in vines. These were once temples, long abandoned and far from the main tourist paths. Elias felt the air grow still as they stepped inside the crumbling entrance of one building. There, scattered across the dusty floor, were items that seemed out of place in a religious site. Metal tools, broken crates, and strange symbols painted along the walls using a reddish-brown pigment. Elias studied the symbols and realized they were not Buddhist markings. They were sharper, angular, and oddly repetitive. Siraya moved with purpose, placing her bag on a stone platform and beginning to sort objects inside it. Elias watched quietly, trying to understand what he was seeing. A group of 3 people entered moments later. They were dressed like locals, but something about them felt coordinated, almost organized. They acknowledged Siraya with a subtle gesture, but did not greet her warmly. Instead, they waited for her next move. Elias stepped back, suddenly aware that the group treated Siraya with the kind of respect one gives a superior. The calm volunteer he had met online now seemed like someone who held authority within an unseen structure. Over the next hour, he witnessed activities that made him increasingly uncomfortable. The group opened crates containing old statues, ceramic fragments, and what looked like pieces of relics. Some were covered in dirt, others in protective cloth. Siraya inspected each item with precision, marking some with chalk and separating them into piles. Elias realized with shock that these artifacts did not belong there. They were clearly taken from various sites, possibly even stolen. It was then that he overheard the name whispered by one of the newcomers, the Lantern Circle. The way it was spoken made it sound like a code, something not meant for outsiders. Siraya continued her work as if Elias did not exist, yet she never told him to leave. It was as though she expected him to witness everything without understanding it. Elias pieced together what he could. The Lantern Circle was not a charity. It was a hidden network moving through Ayutthaya's temples under the cover of religious work. They handled relics the way a smuggling ring might handle contraband, with intense secrecy and a sense of ritual that felt more like superstition than faith. When Siraya finally addressed Elias, it was only to instruct him to carry a small wooden box to another structure. The box was heavier than it looked, and sealed so tightly, he could not open it even if he wanted to. As he carried it across the uneven ground, he noticed more symbols etched into the stone walls, forming patterns that looked almost like maps or coded messages. Inside the second structure, he found an arrangement of lanterns placed in a precise formation around a low altar. This was not an active temple, it was a meeting place, a base of operations. The Lantern Circle had built an entire network under the guise of spiritual restoration. Elias realized something devastating. Siraya had never chosen him because of affection. She had chosen him because he was foreign, lonely, easy to influence, and invisible to local suspicion. He was the perfect courier, the perfect errant runner, the perfect person to blame if anything went wrong. Every moment she had spent communicating with him, every photo she had sent, every gentle message, all of it had been designed to create a sense of trust, so he would follow her into this world without questioning. As the group prepared to leave the abandoned temple, Siraya finally met Elias's eyes. For the first time, he sensed no warmth behind her expression, only calculation. She did not need to speak for him to recognize that their relationship had never been equal. He had stepped into Ayutthaya, seeking love, but what he found was a hidden cult that operated beneath ancient ruins, using strangers like him to further their work, and he was already deeper inside it than he had ever intended to be. Elias spent the following days moving through Ayutthaya, with a constant knot in his stomach. Siraya no longer acted like the warm, spiritual guide who had once comforted him through a computer screen. Now she carried herself with an authority he couldn't ignore. She gave him tasks without explanation, each one involving small, sealed packages or notes he was told to leave at specific locations. The requests were always framed as assistance for restoration work, yet none of the tasks resembled anything related to temples. He told himself he would confront her, ask what exactly these errands meant, but every time he saw her, the cold focus in her eyes made him hesitate. She wasn't the Siraya he had fallen for. She had become someone entirely different, someone he couldn't predict or understand. It was on a hazy morning, just before sunrise, when she sent him a message that felt different from all the others. She instructed him to meet her at Wat Phra Ram alone. The message was short, lacking the gentle tone she once used. Elias sensed an urgency in her words, and despite the fear building inside him, he went. Something inside him believed that this meeting might finally give him the answers he had been desperate to understand. The temple grounds were empty when he arrived. The sun had not yet risen, and the silhouettes of ancient chedis stretched across the ground like dark shadows. A light mist hovered over the grass. At the entrance, he found a single lantern glowing weakly, as though placed for him specifically. Beside it sat his own backpack, the same one he had left locked at his hotel the previous afternoon. Seeing it there caused an instant chill. He knelt down and unzipped it with trembling fingers. Inside were items he had never seen before. Temple maps marked with red ink, coded notes, a ledger filled with numbers, and transaction records with his name printed clearly at the bottom of every page. Panic surged through him. These documents were not just suspicious, they looked incriminating, enough to link him directly to smuggling, theft, and illegal movement of relics. Before he could think, footsteps echoed behind him. 2 members of the Lantern Circle emerged from the shadows between the columns. Their faces were calm, but their presence radiated intention. They held no weapons, yet Elias felt an icy certainty that he was in danger. They walked with practiced silence, like people accustomed to doing their work unseen. Siraya was nowhere in sight. The realization hit him with brutal clarity. He had been brought here as a distraction, a piece of evidence, a convenient scapegoat. She had used him from the start, guiding him into the perfect position where he could carry the weight of the cult's crimes while she and the others disappeared into the underground network they had built. Elias backed away slowly, clutching his backpack. The 2 men advanced with unnerving calm. They were not rushing because they didn't need to. They believed he had nowhere to run. Wat Praram was isolated at that hour, surrounded by quiet roads and dense clusters of ruins. But fear makes the body move before the mind can process. Elias turned and fled across the ancient courtyard, nearly tripping over loose stones. The men sprinted after him, their footsteps pounding against the earth. He dodged behind a crumbling wall, then another, weaving through the ruins desperately. He didn't know the layout well enough to plan an escape, but adrenaline propelled him forward. At one point he slipped down a slope near a dried moat, rolling through dust and weeds. The pain in his shoulder barely registered as he scrambled upright and ran toward a nearby residential area, where he could see faint lights flickering. The moment he reached the first narrow street lined with homes, the footsteps behind him stopped. The men would not chase him, where locals might witness the pursuit. Gasping for breath, Elias looked back across the open space between him and the ruins. There, near the temple entrance, stood Siraya. Her stillness was unnerving. She watched him, without expression or anger, no regret, no hint of the person he thought she was. Just cold calculation. Her eyes met his for only a moment, before she turned away and slipped behind one of the ancient structures. Elias knew then that she had already moved on to the next stage of the plan, leaving him behind as the only visible culprit. She would vanish into the hidden channels of the Lantern Circle while he dealt with the consequences. The sun finally crept over the horizon, casting golden light on the temple ruins. But for Elias, the beauty of Ayutthaya had turned into a maze of shadows he barely escaped with his life. Elias spent the rest of the morning hiding inside a small cafe near the river, unable to stop shaking. He replayed everything that had happened at Wat Praram, trying to make sense of how quickly the situation had turned against him. Every detail from the past weeks now appeared in a different light. The gentle messages, the quiet rituals, the mysterious errands. Each moment fit together into a pattern he had been too blinded by hope to see. Siraya had studied him, shaped him, and positioned him exactly where she needed him. By noon, he gathered the courage to go to the local police station. He carried the incriminating backpack in his hands, hoping honesty would protect him. The officer behind the desk listened patiently as Elias explained everything: the cult activities, the packages, the documents he never signed. The officer's face remained unreadable. He took the backpack, looked through its contents, and stepped away to speak with colleagues in low, urgent voices. When he returned, his expression had changed. He informed Elias that the items were part of an ongoing investigation linked to temple thefts in several provinces. The officers asked Elias how he obtained them and why his name appeared repeatedly in the ledgers. Elias insisted he had been set up, but the officers' responses grew more cautious. They treated him politely, yet with the kind of distance reserved for someone who might be hiding something. One officer quietly pulled Elias aside and warned him in a tone that felt both sympathetic and fearful. The Lantern Circle, he said, was not a new problem. It had existed for years under different names, moving relics across Thailand and selling them into private collections abroad. It operated silently, using strong networks and people who knew how to erase themselves. Several attempts had been made to capture members, but the group always vanished before arrests were made. The officer suggested, without saying it directly, that going deeper into accusations would put Elias in far more danger. Days passed in confusion as the investigation continued. Elias tried to provide information, but most of it only made him look worse. The backpack's contents were authentic. The handwriting on the notes resembled his own. The timestamps on the files matched the period he had been in Thailand. Even the hotel staff confirmed seeing him leave at odd hours, carrying small packages he couldn't explain. Every piece of what Siraya had orchestrated fit together seamlessly. Eventually, Thai authorities informed Elias that, to avoid escalation, he needed to leave the country immediately. They did not accuse him outright, nor did they clear his name. They simply wanted him gone to remove a complication from an already fragile investigation. Elias complied because he had no choice. The cult had already planned his downfall too perfectly. On his last night in Ayutthaya, He walked alone near the ruins. The temples looked peaceful in the moonlight, unchanged by any of the chaos beneath their surface. Tourists wandered nearby, unaware that the ancient stones had just played host to a criminal scheme designed with the precision of a ritual. Elias felt like a ghost drifting between the structures, carrying a truth that no one believed and a story he could not prove. When he boarded his plane the next morning, he searched for Siraya's profiles online. Every trace had vanished. The photos, the posts, the messages gone, as though erased by someone who had done it many times before. The memories of their conversations felt unreal now, like a long, elaborate illusion crafted for a purpose he never understood. Back in Norway, his life resumed, but nothing felt the same. He avoided travel forums, avoided conversations about Buddhism, avoided anything that reminded him of her. Nights were the hardest. Sometimes he woke from dreams of lanterns flickering in the ruins, shadows moving behind temple walls, and Siraya's empty stare watching him from a distance. News reports surfaced weeks later about relics found in another Thai province, once again linked to documents bearing his name. The reports did not mention him directly, but he recognized the pattern. The Lantern Circle had continued its operations, slipping through unseen passageways of the temple system, leaving trails behind that pointed back to him, even though he was thousands of miles away. Elias understood then that he had been part of something far larger, something woven into the very fabric of Thailand's spiritual and criminal undercurrent. Siraya had played her role flawlessly, and he was just another thread used, dyed, and cut away without hesitation. Ayutthaya remained silent, its ruins holding centuries of secrets. Somewhere among them, hidden behind rituals and shadows, the Lantern Circle prepared its next move. And as far as the world was concerned, Elias Corven was simply the foreigner who got too close.